Welcome to My Fertility Podcast, Superhumans.
A space for honest conversations, expert insights, and stories of resilience.
Whether you're just getting started on your fertility journey, facing challenges, or looking to educate yourself, you are in the right place.
We are Dr. Mavis Garcia
and Dr. Wise,
fertility specialists at Markham Fertility Center located in Markham, Ontario, Canada.
Think of us as your biggest cheerleaders. Let's demystify the world of fertility together.
Superhumans! Welcome to My Fertility Podcast for the 85th time. Yes, we have said that 85 times already. And I hope people are not sick of us yet.
Well, I'm not sick of you.
I'm not sick of you either. I'm just getting started.
That is so wild, though. I cannot believe that we have made it to 85 episodes. I'm super proud of us.
Today's episode is very special because this is our 2-year anniversary of the podcast.
Today's episode is going to be a little bit different from previous. We are going to be answering questions that have been submitted by listeners, and we're super excited to hear what you guys have to say.
It's all about the listeners at the end of the day.
Absolutely.
So let's get started and go to our first question.
Yes.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. I'm a listener from Toronto. I'm in a long-term relationship. We are not ready to have kids. Should I freeze my eggs or should I do IVF and freeze embryos for the future? And this is something I'm struggling with a lot.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's something that we talk about in clinic all the time. So let's talk a little bit about the two options here. One would be to freeze your eggs, which is going through the process of the egg retrieval. So you take injections, you come to the clinic for monitoring, the eggs are removed and frozen. They're kept for future use. And the other one is to do IVF, which is the same process of retrieving your eggs, but putting it together with your partner's sperm to create embryos.
So really, from the logistics of doing both of these things, they kind of feel pretty similar, right? Like you're going through the same type of stimulation, same type of retrieval phase. Where things really differ is in terms of what happens in the lab. And so, when we're thinking about freezing eggs, one of the major advantages is that you are leaving that sperm part open. Let's say you opt to proceed with the same partner a few years down the road. Great, we can use that person's sperm. If for whatever reason you're not with that person anymore, then we can use, a different partner's sperm or to proceed with a sperm donor. When you freeze eggs, you're leaving that sperm part open-ended. So you are not sort of stuck with, or you're not sort of, having to be with that particular sperm provider over the long term. And so that is a huge advantage when it comes to egg freezing. Because when you freeze embryos, the egg and the sperm, I tell people they're essentially mashed together. You cannot change out the sperm later on in the future. Those embryos are with that sperm and that's final.
Yeah. There are some other differences to freezing eggs and making embryos. When you're freezing eggs, the eggs are frozen when they're mature, but we don't know what is the potential of those eggs. In other words, when you're going to use them in the future, they have to thaw, then they have to fertilize, then they have to develop into blastocysts. And we don't know if that's going to be the case or not. This is why we talk about how many eggs you need to have frozen, depending on how old you are, to determine the likelihood of making blastocysts. And we go into detail on this on episode 22 when we talked about egg freezing. When you are making embryos, then you know right there and then what is the potential of those eggs, because you are fertilizing them with sperm on the same day that they were retrieved. So then you know at the end of the cycle, okay, there were 4 embryos created. And if you do genetic testing, that's even more, so not a guarantee, but more information about the viability of those embryos. So let's say you do an egg retrieval, you do IVF, and you make 5 embryos and 4 of them are genetically normal, for example. Then you know that per embryo, there is approximately a 65% pregnancy rate. So that is a little bit closer to baby, not a guarantee, but it's a little bit closer to baby than having let's say 15 eggs that you don't know if they're going to thaw and fertilize and turn into healthy blastocysts. So there's certainly some advantages to doing IVF and freezing embryos versus freezing eggs. Now, the big disadvantage, of course, is that you're committed now to this sperm. And if the purpose of freezing eggs is to protect your fertility for the future, Well, now you're kind of banking on this person being available in the future to have a baby. And that is a big if. Dr. Weiss and I have been doing this for a long time, and we have seen it. We have seen it. People that come and make embryos together, and then the relationship breaks up. And then there are women who are now 39 and 40 and unable to make more embryos and cannot use the embryos that they were when they were younger because the relationship is no longer present. And to be very clear, to use an embryo, you need the consent from the egg provider and the consent from the sperm provider. There is no universe in which an embryo can be used without the sperm provider providing explicit consent that they want this embryo to turn into a baby. A lot to consider, but essentially to answer your question, I think this is a discussion to have with your fertility specialist and a lot of soul searching. In the perfect world, in the perfect world, you would do both. You would be able to have 15, 20 eggs frozen, depending on your age, and at the same time be able to have 3 or 4 blastocysts created, and that would be the best of both worlds. Of course, that sometimes is very hard and very expensive to do, so you might have to choose.
There are also some other key differences between freezing of eggs and freezing embryos, and something that's important to note that we still are doing more and more research about, and we're still learning lots about, is the freezing and thawing of eggs. So I tell people an egg is one cell. It is mostly water. It is very fragile. And when you freeze eggs and you then come back and thaw out eggs, not all of the eggs are going to survive. Certainly, we've had some patients where they've had a very large percentage of eggs thaw out properly, and then sometimes a larger proportion don't thaw out properly. We can use somebody's age and how it relates to egg quality to give us a bit of an idea of how well these eggs are going to thaw out, but you don't really know. And so if somebody has not a ton of eggs to start with, then now you're putting them through an extra step where numbers can decrease. You may be ending up with less embryos at the end of the day than if you just go ahead and proceed with making embryos. You know, as I said, an egg is one cell. It's mostly water. They're very fragile. An embryo, a blastocyst, is a big ball of hundreds of cells. They're much more hardy. They do much better, generally speaking, in the freezing and thawing process. And so that's where egg reserve and egg numbers can also come into play. Another factor is cost. It is worth mentioning that egg freezing, the upfront costs are a little bit less than if you go ahead and freeze embryos and do a full IVF cycle. However, the cost difference is not actually that huge. We're talking probably like 20% cost difference. And then, you know, that 20% you will end up paying later on when you come back to thaw the eggs anyway. So that should not be the driving factor in terms of which way you opt to proceed. But I agree. In a perfect world, you would freeze eggs and freeze embryos, but oftentimes that's simply just not realistic. But I think you're right. It really does take a lot of soul searching and really sort of asking yourself what level of certainty that you have that you're going to be with this person in the future. And it can be an uncomfortable conversation. Trust me, I can absolutely imagine. But it is a really, really important conversation to have.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, freezing eggs gives you reproductive freedom. And this is why we talk about egg freezing as a fertility preservation tool, because it really is the only way that, regardless of what happens, and you might not be able to control, I mean, you could be certain today and then things change, right? Relationships change. Yeah. If you're really thinking, you know, I need to preserve my fertility so that I can use it in whichever way I want to in the future, then freezing eggs, it's really the way to go.
And of course, because we have now 85 episodes out, we have many episodes around the IVF process. Episode 14, episode 20, episode 54, and episode 58. So lots of information so you can become really well informed about egg freezing and IVF and all the different nuances.
All right. Well, I like this. This is fun.
Yeah, this is good.
Let's take our next question.
Happy 2-year anniversary to My Fertility Podcast. Congrats, and what an amazing milestone. This podcast has been so informative. My question is, what advancements in fertility medicine genuinely give you the most hope right now? I have a second one. What should people understand about age and fertility that isn't fear-based but still honest?
These are two fabulous questions, and I have so many thoughts about these. So we're going to start with the first one first. So talking about advancements in fertility medicine. I think that one of the things that I am most excited for is ongoing research into the question of why euploid embryos do not stick, like getting a negative pregnancy test, and why people have miscarriages of euploid embryos. Going back to this question of recurrent implantation failure and recurrent pregnancy loss. We have PGT, pre-implantation genetic testing, and we talk all about PGTA with our lovely genetic counselor on episode 30 of the podcast. So PGT is a very kind of overview look at the embryo, right? Looking at things in very broad strokes. You're looking at the number of chromosomes, you're looking at the general shape, the general size of chromosomes. And until now, it is the best test that we have to assess the ability of an embryo to stick and to implant and what the risk of miscarriage is. But it is not perfect by any stretch. And here at Markham Fertility Center and at, fertility clinics, sort of the top clinics around the world, that peak pregnancy rate is kind of maxing out at 65-ish, 70%. And for some reason, nobody really necessarily knows how to get it that much higher, bring that number up to 100%, which is most definitely our goal. And right now, there's a lot of interest in sort of why euploid embryos fail. And so there's ongoing research into something called whole genome sequencing, for instance, looking at the embryo and the genetics and sequencing the whole genome and looking at every single gene in the embryo and seeing, okay, if this gene is present or absent, how does that predict whether euploid embryo will work or not? And so I think that we're going to see big advancements in better predicting which embryos are going to work and really giving people more information about what the likelihood of success is with a specific embryo. There's also more interest in looking at the metabolics of the embryo and looking at the physics of the embryo. I was reading about that one yesterday, but how the embryo appears to the uterine wall and I think that this is really, really interesting cutting edge research. And I hope that in the next 5-10 years, we're going to be able to answer that question of why did my euploid fail?
Another thing that I'm excited about is fertility care. It's becoming more accessible to patients and more patient friendly. For example, now we have virtual care and we have apps. I'm very excited that Markham Fertility Center is starting with a new company called Wawa that has a much better patient communication app, much better EMR system, allowing it to communication and chat and things like that, which is the way that we all communicate in today's world. There's also some companies that are looking into home monitoring. So instead of having to drive to the clinic for your blood work, there's going to be kits introduced where you can check your elation, your estrogen levels. And I am not aware of any fertility clinic doing that yet, but I know that's coming up in the market. And I think that's going to make a big difference, especially for people who live in farther away from fertility clinics. So certainly ways in which fertility care can be more comfortable, more approachable, more personal. I've seen a big move in the industry, and I'm very excited about that.
Now to go on to the second question, asking about age and fertility, and specifically something that's not fear-based, but still honest. This is a really big question and a really big thing that I think that we grapple with every day in clinic. And to be really honest, I think that it really depends on the person. And I think that part of what our job is tailoring the answers and tailoring what we're telling to people based on where people are at and what their understanding is. I think it's fair to say that the vast majority of patients whom we're seeing in a fertility clinic, they have probably Googled. They have probably, used the chat GPT, whatever, and they kind of already know a lot of the information about age and fertility. I mean, this information is pretty easily accessible in today's day and age. And I think when they're coming to see us, they're really looking for us to help interpret that information, not just the raw data. And that's where the art of medicine really comes into play. And that's where you really have to try and know the patient in front of you and try and get a sense of what they need and what they want to hear. And I think that that's really the important subtlety in all of this. And when we're talking about Asian fertility, it is not meant to cause fear, and it's not fear mongering. And to be super clear, we're not doing this because we want you to do IVF. That is absolutely not the goal. I always tell people, I want you to go into things with eyes wide open and appreciating what the numbers are and what that really means, right? Yes, fertility declines with age. Absolutely. Generally speaking, fertility starts declining in women at around age 32. And then once women get into their kind of like mid to late 30s, then that's when fertility rates start to decrease. That line becomes a bit more steep. And as you're getting into your early to mid 40s, fertility rates are generally pretty low. That being said, this is just the average. This is just what is common amongst people. It does not mean that everybody is the exact same way. There are absolutely people who go and get pregnant in their 40s and have healthy babies and they never step foot in a fertility clinic. That is absolutely true. But it's really a question of that conversation that we have. It's not about fear. Truly, it's about empowerment, I hope, is my goal for patients so that they understand sort of where they're at, what's going on, and then to provide them with tools and answers in terms of what we can do and those actions that we can take to get you to where you want to go.
Yeah. And one thing that I tell patients is like, you could choose never to freeze your eggs. You could choose to never do fertility treatment. And then at age 42, get pregnant in the first 3 months and have a healthy baby. That can absolutely happen. It has happened. And that absolutely can be the case. Unfortunately, there is no test to tell you that will be the case, right? And if it is not the case, and now you find yourself at age 40 or 41 or 42, having tried for a year and coming to the fertility clinic at that point, that's where we get into trouble, because unfortunately we can't go back in time. Or if we don't have frozen eggs and we're doing IVF for the first time, it might take multiple cycles. It might be a huge cost and it might not work at the end of the day. So it's not so much saying, after 35, you fall off the cliff. It's not like that. It's just that if you get to a certain point and you're not one of the lucky ones, which unfortunately we can't test for, we are now having a very narrow window of opportunity to help you. Which is why ideally we want patients to be proactive, to think about the things, to freeze their eggs or not freeze their eggs, but to at least have that conversation so that they're not finding themselves at that point feeling like they were not prepared or that they never heard this concept before.
That people aren't blindsided.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And I think it's worth mentioning that, it's not just about freeze your eggs or not freeze your eggs. There's a lot of lifestyle factors that matter too, right? And again, we talked about this in episode 6 of the podcast, where if you are not actively trying to get pregnant, that's not in the near future. Still though, healthy lifestyle is absolutely important. Diet, exercise, sleep. Think about vitamins and supplements and optimizing those things. In episode 5, we talked a lot about egg quality with Dr. Amy. And yes, age of the eggs is still by far the most important factor, but there are things that are within our control that we can optimize to at least get you to the best possible position that you can be in.
Yeah, and that concept of fear mongering, actually, it's one of the reasons that we have this podcast. So be able to have a platform to have real, honest conversation with our patients. Listen, there's nothing worse than somebody sitting in front of you and you're telling them their statistics or their ovarian reserve or the chances of IVF, and they're looking at you like you just drop a bucket of water on their face. The common thing I hear is this sense of frustration, like, I didn't know.
Yeah.
I didn't know. And I never want to hear that again, because everybody deserves to know. This is a conversation that should be at the forefront in our lives, especially as people with ovaries trying to think of a family in the future. This is one of the reasons that we're here. Some of the episodes that have covered this, it's episode 5 with egg quality, episode 6 with lifestyle factors for women. We've done episodes as well on explaining fertility and decrease of ovarian reserve, like episode 33 and 37. We have done episode of the impact of body mass index on fertility on episode 26. So yeah, this is why I'm passionate about patient education, because I don't want people fear mongering. I don't want people selling you supplements and things that don't make a difference in the end. And at the end of the day, what I want is for my patients or everybody out there to be informed and to be empowered. We did an episode with Terry Hart, and she said something that stuck with me. She said, truth is just as empowering as hope. And that episode is to come in the future.
All right, let us take our next question.
Hi, my name's Tanya. I'm a psychiatrist. I live and work in Toronto. I wanted to congratulate you, first of all, on the 2-year anniversary. So congratulations. And then I have 2 questions for you guys. So following residency training, did you feel like you were well prepared to handle some of the more complex personal stories that patients with fertility challenges have? And then the second question is, what have you learned over the years in terms of how to best handle your own emotional well-being given the specific nature of your practice?
Wow, great. 2 questions. So I'm going to start with the first question, which is, after residency, do we feel prepared to handle some of the more complex personal stories? No, no, we didn't. Just to put it into context for our listeners, to get to be a fertility specialist, very similar to being a psychiatrist. We finish high school, then you normally do an undergraduate degree. That could be between 3 and 4 years, depending on which program you choose. And then medical school is 4 years after that. And then residency is 5 years after that. And then there is a special fellowship training, which is 2 years after that. So that's definitely a long time of training. I was 27 when I entered medical school, and I was, 34 when I graduated. So certainly a long time. And you learn a lot, obviously. You become very competent. Lots of skills, lots of practice. But really, yes, I had the skills to do embryo transfers and retrievals, make diagnoses and order tests and things like that. But the personal stories, the grief, the ability to hold space for somebody who is really struggling or suffering, the concept of having to move from one room to another and, saying congratulations in one room and saying I'm sorry in another room, sort of in the course of a very short period of time. That is a skill that takes a lot of time and a lot of practice. And I think that you really only get when you're there and you are in that situation. I've been doing this for about 15 years and I'm still learning. Sometimes some of the stories still take my breath away. And I still wonder at the end of a conversation, did I do okay? Did I do enough? Did I hold enough space for her? Just yesterday, I had a patient with a very difficult pregnancy loss. And I walked out of the room feeling like, oh my God, that was really hard. And did I hold her hand right? Should I have given her more space, less space? It's just a very, very hard thing to do and something that I'm honored and humbled to do, but certainly not easy. And we're still learning. And I think I will continue to be learning until the day I retire.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's not at the fault of the residency training or the fellowship training by any stretch. It's just that there is so much medicine to learn, right? All the pathways and the hormones and the meds and how to deal with all the medical stuff. And then on top of that, how to do like the technical stuff of all the procedures that is already so much. It sounds like a lot of years of schooling and it feels like you have lots of time, but like, honestly, there really isn't. And so it's very intensive and very packed in and very tight. And so we focus in on that stuff first. And I think that's very, very normal in terms of training. When you become a staff and you have your own practice, you're seeing the same patients, whereas you may not sort of have that same continuity of care when you're a learner. When it's your practice and it's you and the patient, like there's nobody else there. It's all on you. And when you are a learner, you do have that kind of backup of you're working with a staff and someone else. And you are kind of thrown in again in the deep end to sort of then try and navigate that. I think I was as prepared as I could reasonably be, I guess I would say, to sort of deal with that. And I think you're absolutely right. It is still very much an ongoing learning that happens absolutely every day. And I'm sure will continue for many, many more years. And I have to say, actually, this podcast has actually been incredibly helpful too, for me and for my own learning in terms of hearing from patients and what some people want and what is helpful, and learning from so many fabulous experts that we've had who have more training specifically in the areas, social workers and psychologists, whereas we don't necessarily have as much training. That I find that really helpful, and I take away a lot from that too. But I think part of a big piece of it is really just kind of trying to learn how to read people, because everybody needs something a little bit different. There are some people who are very stoic and who don't want to kind of quote unquote dwell on the negative. They want to know how to move forward and focus on the next steps and what to do next. And I think that is one way of dealing with things. And then there are some people where you just have to sit with them and be with them in their feelings. And I think that the best thing that we can do is just ask people in terms of what they need and what they want, and to ask them what we can do for them. And that's actually been super helpful for me, just learning that it's okay for me to ask what that person needs in that moment to be able to give it to them. Because I always thought that I should be good enough, so to speak, to like know, but like you don't really know. And I think that's kind of being a big learning point for me.
Yeah. And one thing that is unique about fertility care is that we are treating many times two people. Of course, sometimes we have single women by choice. Sometimes we have people freezing their eggs, but a lot of times we have couples, right? Yeah. And there are two people going through the same experience, but having very different emotions about it. And then they have one doctor, and as the doctor, you really need to your point, understand what each of them needs at different times. So that's also a unique skill as well. I'm interested to hear the answer of the second question. What have you learned over the years in terms of how to best handle our own emotional well-being when given the nature of our practice? And also still a work in progress.
Oh my God, yeah, absolutely.
I can't sleep sometimes. Sometimes I'm overcome with worry, with anxiety, with grief, with sadness for patients. And I used to tell myself that there are two modes. There is the robotic mode where you don't feel anything, and then there is the mode where you feel too much. And now, doing this for 15 years, I realized that's not the case. That's not the way it works. And that there is an in-between. And I don't know that there is like a perfect spot in between, that you're feeling things at different times for different reasons, for different people. And that's all okay. How I personally take care of my own emotional well-being, I try to go to bed boringly early every night because I really need my sleep. I notice when I don't sleep well, I don't process information the same. I exercise routinely. I journal a lot. And I think the best thing about my life and the thing that makes the difficulties of this job okay, it's this person right here. As well as Dr. Chan and Dr. Kanji and Dr. Shang. And truly, we have such a good group of physicians here at American Fertility Center. I consider them all my best friend. And with my eye closed, I trust them completely. And we talk all the time. They understand what it's like. Having these experiences better than any of my other friends, better than my husband. Even though we have a loving relationship and I could tell my husband everything, he just doesn't understand my life experience the way that my colleagues do. So I do a lot of talking and a lot of sharing of the common experience. And that sisterhood, it's really, really important for personally for my emotional well-being in doing this kind of job.
Yeah, I think that although you and I probably have wildly different answers to this question, that is one thing that we for sure agree on. You know, patients have support groups. They have their social networks, Instagram, TikTok, where they're connecting and sort of supporting each other, people that you know, people that you don't know, the support groups and all this other stuff. And that is widely important. And so that's what we have, the sort of the kind of relationship with other fertility physicians and the relationship with the docs here. That is my support group, like 100%. When you have people who truly understand what you're going through and being able to talk about it in a really open and honest way, that is the best medicine. To have people around you who can just get it and who understand and who are like zero judgment, because, you know, a lot of the time, it does feel like bad luck. Like you can do absolutely everything that you set out to do and everything that you should do and everything that, you know, that you learned in training, and still, you know, bad outcomes happen. And that is just unfortunately part and parcel of fertility. I agree. I love my husband. He is awesome and wonderful. And he always asks me how my day was, but he doesn't get it by any stretch. He literally, I think on a daily basis, turns around and says, I could never do your job. I could never do your job. I don't know how you deal with that. Something that I know that we both do is that we do keep all of the happy stories. And we do have mementos of all those happy stories. Yeah. So whether it's the gifts we've gotten from patients that are in our office that are literally like in front of us when we are talking to patients, as a reminder, I have a bulletin board with baby pictures from patients, because that helps remind me, like, yes, the good things do happen. Like
every single card patient given me.
So do I, for sure. When I tell people like it only takes one, like I have pictures of babies where literally there was only one egg and now a baby has come from it. And I look at those and those help remind me, and those motivate me to keep going and be able to talk to the next person, bring the hope again, be the cheerleader, because I know there is still hope. There is still a way to get to where we want to go. And so, at the same time, though, you also have to decompress sometimes. So, yeah, it is focusing on all the boring stuff. What I mean by that is, sleep, diet, eating healthy, trying to get in some exercise, some movement is super, super cathartic for me. I think I do my best thinking when I'm on the treadmill, and then making time to sit with my colleagues and to decompress and to be able to talk. Let's be honest, we usually spend once a week, once every 2 weeks, we all end up on the sofas in the waiting room, just kind of sprawled out, sheer inertia. We don't have enough energy to make it home because it's been a long day, and we just sit and talk and like hang out with your girlfriends.
Okay, let's listen to our next question.
Hey, I am one of your listeners from Toronto, and I'm a huge fan of the podcast. Today, I had a question with regards to fibroids and fertility. I guess you could say that, quote unquote, I am one of the lucky ones because I already know that I have fibroids. It's something I was able to catch early given my family history. But at the same time, even among my circle of girlfriends, I know that so many women don't know what fibroids are or don't know that they have them until they're much deeper into their fertility journey. I am in my 30s and I want to try to plan and be as proactive as I can be. And at the same time, I'm not in a position yet where I'm ready to start for a family. But how can I best plan ahead? I have had the conversations with my doctors. It's been advised that yes, fibroids can cause fertility issues, but it's hard to say until you start trying. So the advice was to try for at least 6 months. And if that doesn't work, then the next steps would be a referral to an IVF specialist, or I would be recommended for surgery for removal. But given that, are there any other specific questions that I should be asking my doctors to ensure that my fibroids don't become an emergency last minute during my fertility journey? Is there anything that I can be more proactive about to ensure that once I am ready to try, it's a much more pleasant and successful experience? Thank you so much in advance, and I look forward to your response.
That's great. That's an excellent question. And thank you so much for listening and being a fan of the podcast. We have actually talked about this on the podcast on episode 28. So we spent the whole episode talking about fibroids and fertility. But in response to your specific question, there's a couple of things that come to mind. Regardless of whether or not you have fibroids, when a woman in her 30s talks to me about her worries about preserving her fertility, then that's always a conversation about lifestyle factors to improve your egg quality, to protect your egg quality, as well as potentially the consideration of freezing your eggs. And that's something that can be done whether or not you have fibroids, because the quality of the eggs will decrease over time. And fibroids might just be one issue out of other issues related to age and decreasing fertility potential. That's part one. And then in terms of actual fibroids and fertility, it really depends on the size of the fibroid and the location of the fibroid in the uterus. So fibroids could be sitting outside the uterus, they could be sitting in the wall of the uterus, or they could be sitting inside the cavity of the uterus where the baby is supposed to grow. So the ones that are sitting inside the cavity of the uterus are called submucosal fibroids, and they do have a very big impact on fertility and should be removed. As a matter of fact, I would argue that if you do have a submucosal fibroid, it might be a good idea to go for removal before you try starting to conceive, because if that's the case, trying for 6 months, it really doesn't make a lot of sense, knowing that you have a submucosal fibroid there. The other question is whether or not you're having symptoms from the fibroid, like pressure or pain or abnormal bleeding, and those things should be taken into account as well. If fibroids are not sitting inside the cavity of the uterus and they're sitting in the wall of the uterus or outside the uterus, then it's most likely not going to impact your fertility journey. And then we don't want to put you through the risk of a surgery unnecessarily. So if you're not having symptoms and you're not trying to conceive and they're not inside the wall of the uterus, then there's really no need to put you through the risk of surgery. And that's when the recommendation would be to start your fertility journey whenever you're ready to do that. And then if they grow or if they become an issue, then they will be addressed at that point.
I absolutely agree 100%. The other thing worth mentioning is that it can change over time. Fibroids do tend to grow. They don't tend to disappear on their own. Before you come, let's say, to a point in your life where you're ready to start trying to get pregnant, it would be important to get a follow-up ultrasound to determine where the fibroids are at then at that point. You may have a new fibroid that pops up. They may have increased in size. And so it may kind of change. It wouldn't necessarily change what we are advising, but it might change sort of your current situation as well. All right, so let us move on to our next question.
Hello, Dr. Garcia and Dr. Weiss. I am your biggest fan, and you may recognize my voice. I am your CEO and your brother in arms. So the world is changing very quickly. We have AI on automation is affecting the world in all areas. How do you think this is going to affect the patient care and fertility? What are your thoughts?
Mark, we love you so much. Thank you so much for being our brother in arms and for being our mentor, priest, and all around just phenomenal person. We love you so much. Thank you. This is a really interesting question for sure. And I'm glad that you asked it because this is not something that we necessarily get to talk about so much. There's so much talk in general in the world about AI and how it's going to change the world and change people's jobs and what AI is going to do and everything like that. And I think the application to fertility is going to be really interesting. I think that we're not going to be replaced by AI anytime soon because there is a super, super important human component, and having that human touch is still really, really important in the world. But where I do think AI is going to be helpful is potentially using that processing power to sort of look at optimizing things and potentially automating things that don't necessarily require a lot of that human touch. So what I mean by that is certain processes in the lab, for instance, using AI to be able to automate things or to create warning systems that are going to give us better insights in terms of what is working and what's not working. I think that's going to be a huge opportunity for AI. I think that also being able to potentially use AI for a little bit of maybe that first step in patient care so we can get people answers a little bit faster before necessarily they can be seen by a person. That might be another really interesting area. It's also worth mentioning where I think AI is not going to be so helpful. I mean, there's lots of talk right now about AI in fertility and people using AI, and it sounds like super sexy when you say that AI is involved, but I do worry about it becoming just like another add-on and another cost and more money for something that is not necessarily going to improve things, right? Because AI only works because we have good data that AI can pull from and that it can mine to come up with an answer or extrapolate something. But I think we're still not very good at entering that data and bringing that data in. And that is where AI is maybe not so helpful. I mean, predicting someone's success rates for IVF, we don't need AI for that. That we have the data for. That is not advanced artificial intelligence requiring. That is simple, just data mining, knowing like, okay, if you're this age and this age, your pregnancy rate would be, plus clinical experience added into that. I think that we're still very much at the beginning stages. I think that there's a lot of really promising things that are happening. I'll have to be honest, I have not seen any great AI-based fertility tools yet, but I'm super excited to sort of see what's going to happen. And I think we're going to start seeing that first in the lab.
I would agree with you. It's not going to replace us, I agree. It might change the way that we interact with patients in terms of AI helping us prioritize patients based on cases. It's going to help us maybe predict flow or lab bookings and things like that. I think in the lab, we're going to be looking at some tools as well. But one of my biggest fears is exactly that, becoming yet another add-on that is unproven, that costs time and money and causes more anxiety than it's worth. And unfortunately, a lot of AI companies, they're businesses trying to sell a product and have a profit. And I do worry that fertility patients are a vulnerable population. And of course, we want all the tools possible to ensure success. And sometimes the word AI is very sexy, and then the desire to have answers to things that we don't have answers for, and the desire to control outcomes in outcomes that cannot be controlled can really come together to maybe it become sort of a negative force having patients feel like they have to necessarily use these tools in order to have an outcome when that's not really the case right now.
I really want to see an AI tool that actually says that it's going to have a higher pregnancy rate.
Exactly.
It's proven. And that's what I always ask. And that's what I always want to know. And that's what we're not seeing quite yet.
Yeah. Or an AI tool that is going to save money. Like, if I have an AI tool that says you don't need to do PGT because the AI tool is so good that it's going to predict which embryo is going to implant.
Yeah.
Because if you still have to do IVF and have, let's say, 15 eggs, and the tool is going to predict 5, but you still have to fertilize all 10 of them and make blastocysts in all 10 of them and do genetic testing in whatever blastocysts you make and go for transfer 1 to transfer 2 to transfer 3, then it's an add-on that didn't really change the cost of the treatment and what you have to do. But once we start seeing an AI tool that decreases the cost of treatment, decreases the number of treatments that you have to make, and can really make predictions that is going to make us do something that we wouldn't have done otherwise. Like we don't have to freeze your eggs because the AI tool told us that you're going to have good fertility potential when you're older. We don't have to do IVF because the AI tool told us that IUI is going to work, right? So that isn't there yet. And until we see that.
And that we have good evidence and good studies showing this, not just because somebody tells us so.
Right.
We want the studies. Show us the evidence.
All right. I think you're getting too excited. We need to go to our next question.
Listen. It is not a real podcast episode unless Dr. Wise throws in a rant, here and there, I just feel really passionate about this because I want to be smart with it.
I completely agree with you. But let's get to the next question.
Hi, from Stouffville, Ontario. What have you learned from your podcast since you started? How did you change or grow?
Well, I learned that Dr. Wise liked to do epic rants.
Yeah, you don't spend enough time with me in clinic on my rants. I did my PCOS rant just again yesterday.
No, but in all seriousness, it has been a huge learning curve. I wanted to do a podcast for a long time and tried unsuccessfully multiple times to get going on my own until I was able to convince Dr. Wise to join me on this adventure. And she has not only joined me, but she has completely taken it and pushed me even when I really needed to be pushed. So I'm very, very grateful that we're doing this together. So, we've learned to listen. Certainly, it's different when you're having conversations with people online or on Instagram than when you're having conversations in the office. So certainly still blows my mind when patients say to me, I've listened to the podcast and because of that, I learned this or understand this. It's an amazing feeling to know that you are impacting lives outside of the work that you do in the office. So every share, everybody who listens, everybody that has a little bit more information, regardless of which clinic they end up going to, it's amazing to know that we had something to do with that, which was the point of doing this all along. We have listeners in countries all over the world, people that we're never going to see at My Fertility Center, but we still want to get the word out there to everyone. That's certainly something that I have learned since I started the podcast. What about you?
This podcast has been an amazing experience. And we started, I was terrified. I was scared because I really thought I didn't have anything worth saying to broadcast out, to be perfectly honest. I thought why in the world would anybody want to listen to me? But I think what I've learned is that this information is absolutely valuable and that we are making a difference and is worth it to get out there and to have that information available. And we are teaching and educating a lot of people. I would say more than anything, I have learned to find my own voice in all of this. I am way more confident in my own ability to speak up and to say something that may not be in agreement with what other people are posting online. And to say that, because that is what I truly believe. And then to talk about the evidence. We've talked about a lot of things that maybe are controversial. We talk about our own opinions. We talk about what we do here at Markham Fertility Center. And there are other people who are probably out there saying the exact opposite of we are. And being brave enough to post that online for me was actually a really big learning journey. I am way more comfortable in being uncomfortable, if I can say that. and to be able to stand up and say, not necessarily specifically call out certain individuals, but to put out information out there that maybe helps to dismantle a bit of that fear mongering, dismantle a little bit of that angle that people have, whether it's like financial, whether it's those people who are just trying to sell you another supplement or vitamin or something that they have branded because, they'll tell you that it's better or whatever. To be able to have a podcast episode where we say, okay, listen, we're going to look at this specific thing and we're going to talk about the evidence for this specifically, how there's no evidence for that. Even if certain individuals may not be so happy with us or may not hear it, or to talk about why we freeze eggs versus why we freeze embryos, like that first question in terms of the answer we give. And let's talk about the kind of the elephant in the room, immune, and all of our immune testing. I mean, took us a really long time to get to the immune episodes and to actually start recording them.
That's right.
Because for me, we were super anxious and we were fearful in terms of what other people were going to say and what people were going to think about it. We found our own voice. We found the confidence. I'm super, super proud of what we've put out. And I would be happy for anybody I know to listen to that. We've made a really good balanced approach. And I love that.
Absolutely. I'm excited to see where we're going with another year of the podcast. I also feel like, because of all the time that we have to spend together. I mean, we were good friends before, but now we've just gotten so much closer.
Oh, yeah.
Because, we just spend a lot more time together. And of course, between podcast episode and podcast episode, there is a joke or a laugh or a story. So I get to physically spend more time with you since we've been doing this. So that has been great as well.
Oh, yeah. No, one day we will have to put out a blooper episode because stuff.
Only when I retire, because I just can't.
The things that go on behind the scenes.
Maybe played in my funeral.
Oh, no. The things that go on behind the scenes, like singing, dancing. Oh, my God. It's chaos. It's a miracle that Daniela, our producer, has stuck with us and puts up with us, because poor thing has to deal with the two of us.
But really, the biggest thing is thank you so much to our listeners. You are the reason that we do this. Over the last 2 years, we have reached 65,000 downloads. We have released 85 episodes. We have listeners from all over the world, like Whitby, Melbourne, Ottawa,
Kitchener, Amsterdam, Berlin, Montreal,
Toronto, Brooklyn, Los Angeles, like really all over the world. It is such an amazing thing that you welcome us into your time, into your space, that you trust us for valuable, reliable information. And we don't take that for granted. So thank you. Thank you to all of you out there for every share, every comment, and every download. We appreciate it so much, and we're going to continue to work really hard to bring you up-to-date, valid information for you in the next year.
And also, it's important to thank all the people behind the scenes too. So a big thank you to our producer, Daniela, who is an absolute godsend, who keeps us in line, who makes us get down to business and record episodes, even when we just want to sit and gossip. And who does such an amazing job with the editing and organizing social media and helping us all without this. Because honest to God, if it weren't for Daniela, this would not have happened. Period. Full stop.
Absolutely.
Also, big thank you to all the other physicians here at Markham Fertility Center, Dr. Chan, Dr. Chong, Dr. Kanji, because we are able to do this because they help us out and are seeing patients while we are doing this. And if it were not for them and their support, there is absolutely no way that we would be able to do all the things that we do and to juggle all the things. And a big thank you to our administrative staff, who help also wrangle our schedules to give us the time to be able to do this as well. And of course, a big shout out to our families who deal with us and put up with us while we are writing podcast episodes. For me personally, when I'm sitting at home, I'm writing podcast episodes, having the support from people at home to be able to do that makes a big difference too.
Absolutely. Well, that's a wrap for today, and we can't wait to show you what we have in store for the upcoming year. Stay tuned.
And that's a wrap for today, Superhumans.
If you're looking to connect, get social with us. Follow us on YouTube and Instagram at My Fertility Podcast, or visit us online at markandfertility.com. And don't forget, follow, subscribe, and share your favorite episode.
Thanks for listening to My Fertility Podcast and for being a vital part of our community. We know you've got this. If you found this episode of My Fertility Podcast helpful,
please take a moment to head over to the review section and leave us your thoughts. Your reviews and comments are incredibly valuable to us and help guide future episodes. We also welcome you to direct your questions to info@myfertilitypodcast.com.
My Fertility Podcast is produced by Rabbit Media Inc. in conjunction with Dr. Garcia and Dr. Weiss. Music, Island Memories, instrumental by Descript stock music. My Fertility Podcast is not intended to replace any type or variation thereof professional medical, health, or legal advice, nor should the content be taken as medical advice. Please contact your primary healthcare professional regarding any medical questions you may have. The information presented in this podcast is based on the knowledge and understanding of the host at the time of recording. Medical knowledge is constantly evolving, and new research may change the understanding of health-related topics. While we strive to provide accurate and up-to-date information, we do not guarantee the completeness, accuracy, or timeliness of the content. The views expressed in this podcast by guests are not those of the host or the management. This podcast is not intended to impose any type of discrimination. My Fertility Podcast and its management are not responsible for any losses, damages, or liabilities that may arise from the use of this podcast.